Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to WatchBox, and thanks for logging on. As ever, all you see here is for sale. Reach out to Tim Mosso at thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details. Names, references, and prices in the description below. Reach out to Tim Mosso at thewatchbox.com to buy or to sell. We are buying watches and stocking up for the holidays. You supply me. Sell me one watch or an entire collection with no upper limit on value. Once again, to reach out, Tim Mosso at thewatchbox.com. Let's jump straight in. The 5960-1A010 launched in 2017 and built for about 8 months of one model year. This is a flyback chronograph, power reserve, annual calendar, steel bracelet Patek Philippe sports watch, loomed dial, black dial, the rarest of an already rare line, and easily the best of the 5960s. This watch has it all going on. 40.5 millimeters in diameter. You can see it's fairly slim with beautiful tapered lugs. When you throw it on the wrist, the 5-link bracelet vents beautifully, so it's perfect for hot weather, but it also has a wonderful souplesse, being extremely comfortable and flexible. The watch is viable as a dress watch or as a sports watch, and as you can see on a 16-centimeter circumference wrist, it wears beautifully. It also wears flush enough that you could wear it underneath a cuff. Taking a quick look at the dial, you can see there's a lot to love here, and also a lot of complication. There's a mono counter for the chronograph down at 6 o'clock, hours and minutes on one register. There's a small aperture below the hands. That's the day-night indicator, so you know when not to use the calendar. You can see, and I will move the hands up at 12 o'clock out of the way, there is a power reserve indicator for the 55-hour automatic winding power reserve. It is a flyback chronograph, reset and restart with one push, and an annual calendar with the day, the date, and the month. You need adjusted only once a year during the jump from February to March, and note the use of black discs for the calendar. There is more lume, and there are larger indices and larger hands on the 5960-1A than on the dress watch equivalents. So this timepiece is visible after dark. The case back, CH 28520, 55-hour automatic winding power reserve, unidirectional winding, silicone bearings, free-sprung gyromax style balance, 6-position adjustment, anti-magnetic silicone hairspring, vertical clutch and column wheel. And because of the vertical clutch, you can just leave the chronograph running full-time, which means if you want to use the seconds hand as the seconds hand, you can zero, reset, and synchronize it, setting the watch to the second using the flyback function. If you prefer something a little bit larger and more formal, this was probably one of the largest dress watches of any kind from any brand in the 1990s. You have to remember that back in 1998, when the first Patek Philippe 5070 arrived, what was this size? Well, not a whole lot. An IWC Portuguese, a Royal Oak Offshore, maybe a Panerai Luminor. This watch, as a dress watch from Patek Philippe, made waves for all the right reasons. Even to this day, it has impressive wrist presence, grace, a lovely aspect ratio, and a flat profile. The timepiece is gorgeous in rose gold with a strong silver gray metallic dial and rose gold applique numerals. You can see at 48 millimeters, it's really not that broad across the wrist, so in spite of its size, it wears well. I've had a couple of 5070Rs on the show recently, but this one is in the best case scenario and best case condition that I have seen. Now, taking a quick look at the bezel, you can see that it is razor sharp on its edge. The stacked pagoda-style tiers of the 5070 bezel help to define the look of the watch, and you can see just how crisp those are. You can also see that the fluting of the lugs, and it's really evident from this angle, deep, sharp, well-defined, just as good as the day this left Geneva, and that is the case all the way around, where the fluting is deep and symmetrical from lug to lug and from side to side. You really get a good sense in the light right here. This watch has been minimally, if ever, refinished. Now, turning it all over, I really have to say that I love the CH2770. Yes, it's Lemania based, and that's actually a good thing, as the Lemania movement, in many regards, is more nostalgic, certainly more old-fashioned, and more charming than the subsequent 29535. Because of the pipeline for obtaining these and finishing them, they constrained production of the 5070s, whereas the subsequent 5170 has largely been produced at whatever rate the market would bear. These are scarcer. Big, slow-beating 18,000 vibration per hour balance, 5-position adjustment, free-sprung gyromax style, handmade Breguet overcoil hairspring, Geneva hallmark finish. It does feature a column wheel and a lateral clutch architecture, which you can see beautifully in action. And then it has a 65-hour manual wind power reserve. Note the quality of the ungulage, not just across the brass bridges, but also across the steel components of the chronograph. This is a truly special watch, matching rose gold deployant clasp, one of the best of Patek Philippe in this era or any. And speaking of any era, let's turn the clock back to the 1930s. This watch came out in 2012, and it's one of the few vintage reeditions of which I can truly say the new model surpassed the original. This is, of course, the Grand Reverso Rouge, the 1931 Rouge, whatever you want to call it. This timepiece, which arrived in 2012 as not specifically a limited edition, but a boutique exclusive, instantly redefined the look of the Grand Reverso tribute to 1931. That watch, which arrived effectively as the 80th anniversary Reverso in 2011, was stolid, sober, muted, a little bit understated, maybe too quiet visually. This watch is nothing of the sort. Drawing on the imagery of a red lacquered dial Reverso from the Heritage Gallery, the JLC Factory Museum, this watch pegged the meter for aesthetics. Stainless steel, 27.5 millimeters across, 46.5 millimeters lug to lug, and only 7.4 millimeters thick. When you throw this watch on the wrist, though it's not a huge watch, my goodness, does it declare itself. This is a timepiece of outstanding character and color. It's a watch that defines Jaeger LeCoultre. If you're going to own your Omega Moonwatch, your Rolex Submariner, your Patek Nautilus, and your AP Royal Oak, this is going to be the icon watch you buy from JLC. And since there truly is no definitive Reverso, you as a collector are free to take whichever variant speaks to you, and this one speaks to me. It has emotional resonance that very few two-hand watches do. If you take a close look, the red lacquer has a glossy gleam, a bottomless quality to it, with lovely black-polished applique dart-style indices, and the hands at center broadsword and faceted for contrast. The first Reversos used cases made by Wenger and movements made by Tavannes. The design was subcontracted by Jaeger, so there was no LeCoultre or Jaeger LeCoultre labeling on the dial, which is why the first examples read only Reverso, and that is the case with this example here. You have engine turning inside the chassis. The back, as with the original Reversos, is entirely unadorned, as the original idea was basically you would have a shield on the reverse side of the watch to protect it from the blows of an active lifestyle. Originally said to be polo mallets. Back when crystals were truly glass, you could turn this one over and protect it, and then flip it back again when the time came to tell the time. Manual wind, 45-hour power reserve. This is a manufactured watch inside and out, with JLC making the entirety of it in the modern era. Now, of course, the timepiece is nostalgic, lovable, rare, and coveted. This is the single most sought modern Reverso. From red dials to blue dials in 2019. So this is the follow-up to the arrival of the new generation Pepsi in 2018. It's important to note that this watch right here, and you can tell the difference because it has the little Swiss made crown separator down at 6 o'clock. This is the 3-day power reserve 126719 BLRO. So it succeeded the previous blue dial 48-hour power reserve model with the new 70-hour power reserve model. Aesthetically, substantially, mechanically, not huge changes, but it is nice to know that you have the movement, the 3285, based on the latest Rolex Chronergy escapement architecture. Still 40 millimeters, still equipped with the Oyster bracelet. This is what really sets the white gold model apart from the stainless steel model. The Oyster bracelet is sportier. It's more rugged, it's more durable, it's a more aggressive look on the wrist. It's also, frankly, a bit more butch, and that's why folks tend to prefer this look over the Jubilee in many instances. But you will have to pay for it, as this watch is white gold, and the blue dial was Rolex's subtle way of further differentiating the white gold Pepsi from the standard stainless steel model. Yes, it's true the steel model has the Jubilee bracelet, but it also has a black dial. So when you see the blue dial on a Pepsi with an Oyster bracelet, you know you're looking at white gold, and my goodness, is the heft of this watch impressive. It's also 100 meters water resistant and a COSC chronometer, so there's a lot to recommend it. Let's take a look at a lume shot, because this is the first truly well-lumed watch we've had on the show so far. You can see that Rolex Chromolite lume, quite bright. It's identical to the type of lume you'll get on a Rolex dive watch. My phone's having a little bit of trouble adjusting. There we go. Note that all four hands, hours, minutes, seconds, and the 24-hour independent time zone all entirely lumed. And of course, in the modern era, the Pepsi bezel, always ceramic for scratch resistance. Let's talk about independence. These watches are no longer absolute screaming bargains because they are recognized as historically important. These watches, the first generation Roger Dubuis Sympathy timepieces, are recognized for both design excellence and historical importance, as Roger Dubuis, previously a complication specialist for Patek Philippe, co-founded a company called Sogem in Geneva during the early 1990s, and by 1995 they were building their first watches in the Homage and Sympathy collections. The Sympathy case, created by a Vallée de Joux watchmaker, features a wonderful fluid form that's echoed in the bezel, the dial, and the sapphire, and it's that coincidence of bezel and sapphire lines that makes the first generation Sympathy so desirable and so rare, because this was expensive to make and difficult to make water resistant. As a result, for the sake of production and streamlining costs, there was a redesign that created same basic external case shape, but with a round sapphire and a round inner bezel. These early models are far more sought, and I'll mention that this is very similar, differing only in metal, to the watch that Roger Dubuis himself wore. This is the Sympathy 37 Perpetual calendar, nominally a 37mm watch in white gold. I can tell you it wears a little bit larger than that. It has a lovely cream lacquered dial featuring a bi-retrograde perpetual calendar, and this is a module that Roger Dubuis helped develop. You can see it is a retrograde date, a retrograde week. There is a month and a leap year indicator, coaxial up at 12 o'clock, and then there's a moon phase. White gold leaf-style hands, and then a lovely track outboard. You will note it says Bulletin d'Observatoire up at 12 o'clock, and that's because in addition to being a Geneva hallmark movement, this is a French-certified Besançon Observatory chronometer. So you have a Geneva hallmark movement based on the Longines L990 twin-barrel automatic, and then it has been through the fully cased-up test of chronometry at the observatory in Besançon, France. The finish is outstanding. The architecture is handsome. The modifications to make this a Roger Dubuis movement extensive, and a truly collectible watch from an era that is becoming recognized as the birth of modern independent horology, with Roger Dubuis as one of the early adherents, innovators, and as a result, most significant pioneers. You can see it has a lot of presence on the wrist. I would actually say think of this as more like a 41, 42mm round watch. Because of those lugs, it does not wear like a 37. Extensively handmade and hand-finished inside and out, this watch has the look of fluid molten metal drawn out and flash frozen. Truly special and a useful complication. Not long after the Sympathy 1, we saw the arrival of a new company, but an old name, well known as a white label movement designer. F.P. Journe had been designing movements for others for years, by the time he founded Montreux Jean in 1999. The first product, the tourbillon remontoir, was a world premiere, combining a tourbillon with a remontoir d'égalité constant force device. He followed that up the next year with the chronometer à résonance, a concept he had originally attempted in a pocket watch, porting over the idea of pendulum clock synchronization from Antique Janvier, a clockmaker. Journe created a balance system that allowed closely coupled independent movements inside one case to synchronize to each other. So you have two separate barrels, two separate drivetrains, two escapements, and two balances, and then there's a little pinion. You can see a rose gold screw at the center, and then a rack, and you can use that to adjust the clearance between the two balances. And like metronomes or pendulums, which will synchronize to each other if allowed to operate in proximity, the two sides of the movement, which have no mechanical coupling, will synchronize. So they auto-correct. If one runs slow, the other speeds it up, and vice versa. The timepiece has a 42-hour manual wind power reserve. It has a platinum case. It has a brass movement, a yellow gold dial, and as you can see on my wrist, this original 38mm chronometer à résonance has wonderful proportions and beautiful case lines. The combination of the yellow gold dial with the platinum case is a stark, sharp, and striking contrast. The timepiece also features the much-loved Resonance 1 features. Let's talk briefly about what those are. First, symmetrical 12-12 dials. They can be set independently using the bullhead crown. The crown winds both sides symmetrically. A power reserve represents the reserve for both sides. And then, of course, you can set them independently to operate as essentially a dual-time watch, but that's not necessarily the idea. If you take a look, there's a crown down at 4 o'clock. It takes about 7 to 10 minutes for the resonance effect to gain purchase on the balances, so the seconds hands might not be synchronized. You pull the crown down at 4 and you synchronize once resonance has taken effect. It's also a wonderful piece of horological theater to entertain your friends. Now, the movement is brass, which means that the bridges and plates are made of brass, and they're silver because they're rhodium plated to prevent corrosion. Note both French and Swiss hallmarks on the case back, as well as the stamp 01R. Up to about mid-2005, Journe cases were stamped with the year of manufacture, and up to about mid-2008, they were stamped with the maker's mark of Eleanor of Paris, with the result that they had both French and Swiss hallmarks on the precious metal. That ended about mid-2008 when the factory was bought by F.P. Journe and moved from Paris Metropolitan to Geneva Metropolitan. So a lot to love here. Platinum with the yellow gold dial, 38 millimeters, resonance 1, brass movement, and as you can see, this one has an upgrade, a platinum F.P. Journe deployant clasp. Most of these watches were delivered with pin buckles. Let's talk sports watches. Let's talk Panerai. So this is a watch that I happen to love because the combination of the Radiomir 1940 case and the green dial and the PAM 736 is just handsome. At 47 millimeters, now this is a big watch, and I'm not going to lie, but it has a lot of vintage evocative elements as well as luxurious touches that enhance the experience. And I'm going to polish up that sapphire, and it is a sapphire, though it has the bubble-like appearance of a plexiglass. I can assure you it is in fact corundum. So very hard and scratch resistant, but with that lovely off-axis distortion of plexi. 47 millimeters in stainless steel. The timepiece is broad on the wrist with a lovely green dial, silver case, military olive green Panerai OEM strap to match, and rose gold accents on the hands. You can see they pop in the light. The dial is sandwich style, which means it's a stencil over a solid disc of lume, and the lume disc is that ecru simulated patina look. A handsome, broad, and surprisingly wearable watch. Could I wear it? Yes. I wouldn't necessarily wear it on a wrist smaller than 16 centimeters circumference, but you're going to have no trouble with a wrist of that size. Let's quickly take a look at the crown, which is a screw down, and the watch has a fun feature for those of you who travel frequently. The timepiece, you wind it up here, is the lovely P3000. 3 days, manual wind, twin mainspring barrels, very tough, with a full balance bridge and a free sprung index. So it's effectively the same architecture that you'll find ubiquitous on Rolex watches. And then you have this lovely satin finish across the bridges, and though they are split for easier servicing, this appearance of a 3/4 bridge with the lateral satin finish is designed to evoke the Rolex Codebert and Angelus SF240 movements used during the era of Panerai combat watches. 100 meters water resistant with a screw down crown. The timepiece altogether is a useful travel watch because you have the ability to jump the hour hand independently. And I happen to like the presence of the date. This is a fun watch to own because it is so versatile. It's swimmable, it's dressable. It's a watch that just about any wrist size, 16 centimeters or larger, can wear. And though the size, the proportions, and the look are brash Panerai, nevertheless, I see people rocking this with a tuxedo, and I happen to think that the green dials were a bit of a sleeper hit for Panerai, especially with the rose gold accents. Here's a quick loom shot of that sandwich dial. I promised you visual fireworks, and that is exactly what you get. Note all 3 hands are loomed. That includes the seconds, the hours, as well as the minutes. And you can see, because of the stencil over the loom, that the individual wells, indices, and numerals have lovely depth. And thanks to that sapphire with the bubble shape, lovely off-axis distortion. Okay, we turn the clock back to a model that came out in 1998 and ran through 2003. The IWC GST chronograph in titanium, 40 millimeters, day-date complication chronograph, 120 meters water resistant in titanium. The GST was available in gold, steel, or titanium, and I always say, get the titanium. The timepiece features the classic IWC fish crown, a lovely media-blasted surface, and you can really see that it has a wonderfully subtle glow in the light rather than the explosive finish of that polished Panerai. This is a more subtle sports watch in the spirit of German-speaking Schaffhausen. You can also see that the bracelet was an innovative one on the GST, as every individual link on both sides was made removable for precise sizing. And you can see how the system goes together. You press and release that little trigger underneath and then push the bar through. So you've got a lot of flexibility in getting just the right fit. Media blasted clasp internal. Note that there's a trigger system for popping it open. You can see the reverse of the case. And then the dial, which has a lovely vaulted International Watch Co. script across the top. There is a chapter ring that slopes down from the bezel to the base of the dial. There is a tachymeter scale. Everything is simple, white on black for high contrast, and the watch features a day and a date with a double quickset. Back then, IWC would take knockdown kits from ETA, and this watch is based on a 7750 architecture. IWC would replace the power source, the regulator, often train wheels, balance, hairspring, making them their own and adjusting them in-house, taking essentially only the bridges and plates and making sure everything else was up to Schaffhausen specifications. So this was the era before ETA stopped shipping knockdown kits. So IWC has really gone through the 7750 to make it its own with this watch. It's also a wonderful size, though it wears a bit larger than its rated 40 millimeters because of the projecting lugs. You can see that it is a handsome and slightly nostalgic look. Before the era of size and color and bombast under Georges Kern, this was a little bit more, dare I say, Teutonic in its character. And you know what? That's just fine. For a company in the northeast part of Switzerland that has its heritage rooted in American and German-Swiss watchmaking, this is about as in character as any IWC, short of a Pilot or a Portuguese. A really lovely piece from an underrated IWC model line. But let's say you want to go diving. Well, with this Breitling Super Ocean 44 Special Edition, you've got everything you need. Helium escape valve? Check. 1,000 meter diving depth? Check. Burly case construction? You better believe it. Ceramic bezel? Not just the insert, the whole bezel. And take a look. Captive bezel construction with the bezel fixed to the case by screws. They've done it even with the ceramic bezel so that you can't accidentally snap it off. You have to dismantle the screws to remove the bezel from the case. And note the attention to detail. Polished knurling outboard and satin finish on the top. The dial with all applique indices. And the watch powered by a tank tough 17 caliber. 17 means an ETA 2824 or Sellita SW200 equivalent. Hacking, stop seconds, COSC certified Swiss chronometer, and a bracelet of extraordinary character and solidity. You can see this is a professional 3 style asymmetrical slash cut. Throw it on the wrist. It's big, make no mistake. My wrist, 16 centimeters circumference, getting close to the lower limit for this watch. I'd say your wrist could wear this watch if it's 15 centimeters circumference or larger. My goodness, does this thing feel like a tank. It looks like a tank, it feels like a tank. Oddly, it's not terribly thick, but in every other regard, physically imposing. Let's take a look at a loom shot. Absolutely no shortage of loom on this Breitling dive watch. The Super Ocean 44 Special Edition, blue ceramic bezel, blazing green Luminova dial, and steel case. This model was built in 2018, so it's still exceptionally fresh. Okay, let's talk about something that's still relatively new, the Bulgari Octofinissimo automatic. In fact, let's talk about something that's so new it just debuted in 2020. Remember, the original watch won the Men's Watch Prize at the GPHG in 2017. Well, for 2020, and we're just starting to see these pre-owned, you get the same watch but with a screw-down crown, a combination of polished and satinated steel, and a 100-meter water resistance. This is now a real sports watch. 6.7 millimeters thick, so it's still ultra-thin, by 40 millimeters in diameter. It's a watch that wears flat, flush, and comfortable. It has a contemporary presence on the wrist. Nevertheless, it also has a timeless proportion about it, such that it's probably going to look just as good in 2040 and 2060. They claim that there are 110 facets to this case, and I'm not going to argue the point. It is remarkably dynamic. But the diversity of polish and satin here, the original was all media blasted. It's the combination of the two contrasting finishes that really brings out the angularity and nuance of this case. It is broad, but it's not wide across the wrist. Only 46.5 millimeters from end to end. You could wear this on a smaller wrist than mine. Now, taking a quick look at the case back, this is where a lot of the fun lies, because Bulgari is a fully integrated manufacturer. A lot of folks don't realize that even brands like Alango don't make their cases, or their bracelets, or their clasps. Bulgari makes movements, cases, dials, clasps, bracelets, all of it. And the actual manufacturer where the movements are made is the old Gerald Genta Daniel Roth manufacturer in the Vallée du Jeu in Le Sentier. So the folks who've made those crazy ultra-thin tourbillon, grand sonnerie, and minute repeater movements over the years in the Genta series of watches. Those are the people who make this. The movement itself is over 36 millimeters in diameter, only 2.23 millimeters thick, and with a platinum micro rotor, it has a 60-hour power reserve. Now with a screw-down crown, this is a 100-meter watch that's truly swimmable, and in my opinion, getting close to sports watch perfection. If I told you I was going to show you a sports watch after the Bulgari, my guess is you would not have guessed this. This is the H. Moser & C Heritage Center Second. I'm going to pull the crown out, unobscure the logo, because in good taste, this is the only printing on the dial. H. Moser & C, you know it's Swiss-made, so it doesn't have to declare itself. Designed in a vintage pilot style with a lovely evacuated coining on the flank of the case, it has handsome wire-style lugs, a beautiful high-polished domed bezel, an onion-style splayed crown, and an enormous funky blue fumé metallic dial. Now, of course, you know fumé and funky blue as distinctive of Moser. 42 millimeters in diameter. This one has an exceptionally broad no-date dial with remarkably vaulted solid blocks of luminova used for the numerals. So these are not just printed transferred features of paint. These are actually solid. They have 3 dimensionals and they sit having been placed on the dial rather than transferred by, for example, a tampon balloon. Giant broadsword style hands, a railroad seconds track outboard, a bob counterweighted needle style seconds hand, and that funky blue color that in fumé fashion fades to navy blue, almost black at the edges. Turn it over, HMC caliber 200, 3-day power reserve, automatic winding with bidirectional magic lever style pawl-based winding system. You can see the balance beating away at 21,600 vibrations per hour, and exceptionally, it has a full balance bridge with a free-sprung index for toughness, and the escapement, the balance, and the hairspring all made in-house by Moser at their subsidiary Precision Engineering. We talked about German-Swiss watchmaking in Schaffhausen with IWC, but whereas IWC makes over 100,000 watches a year, Moser makes 1,500. So you get a sense of the economies or relative scale. Let's throw this one underneath the light and do a loom shot, because this is going to be the best loom shot of the show. What did I say? Moser. They don't fool around. This is a true sports watch. Pilot style with miles of style, to be perfectly honest. Day or night, you know exactly what it is. This is a remarkably practical stainless steel watch. So if you associate Moser with dress watches and precious metal, think again. This is the antidote. Not everyone is into a dress watch, and Moser understands that. But when the time comes for formal wear, it helps to have the best of the best, and in that regard, Moser is still the industry leader. With a dial so unadorned, it begs the term concept. This is the Moser Endeavor Perpetual Moon Concept, 42 millimeters in red gold. The timepiece is one of 50 created with a moon phase whose adjustment interval, that is, time till you must reset it, is 1,027 years. It is very safe to say that if you set it, you're good. You can forget it. There's a little AM/PM index at the center of the dial that's coaxial with the other hands, and you'll note that it features stop seconds. The Endeavor case is gorgeous. Like the Sympathy from Roger Dubuis, like the first generation Sympathy, it has the look of something fluid, drawn out while still molten and then frozen in that fluid form. You can see how the bezel extends and then expands at 6 o'clock and 12 o'clock and thins out at the mid-case. It's entirely concave in profile to thin out the apparent thickness of the watch. Note the scalloped and mirror-polished concave hollows of the case, the vertical satin finish opposite the crown, and then the use of a little kerf underneath the crown so you can more easily dig in your fingernails to set the watch. Now the dial here is midnight blue, and it is also a gradient fade. Not as dramatic as funky blue, that's self-evident. This fades from almost cobalt blue to straight up black, and you can see the contrast between the rose gold of the hands and the blue-black of the dial. Now turn it over, the movement is the 801, so there's a lot going on here and a lot to love. A manufacturer caliber as with the HMC 200 you just saw. It features the same full balance bridge and free spring index, but it adds an overcoil hairspring for concentric beating in any position, a solid gold escapement for reduced friction, and a full platform escapement and balance structure that can be lifted out as a unit and replaced by a pre-serviced unit when it goes in for service at Schaffhausen. Twin mainspring barrels fixed in golden screw-adhered chaton, a power reserve indicator for the 7-day indicated power reserve. Thanks to the twin barrels, 7 days is the claimed reserve. It will actually run for almost 9, and it beats away at a nostalgic 18,000 vibrations per hour with a lovely double-crested Côte de Genève across the bridges. 42 millimeters, so it's not a small dress watch, but nor is it a Brobdingnagian thing. You can see that it fits my wrist well, and it's the short lug structure that makes this viable on a wrist as small as 14 centimeters, maybe even 13.5 centimeters circumference. Truly special, elegance incarnate, and comprehensively engineered. This is as good as it gets from the folks at Moser. Now, if we're speaking German at our watchmaker, it helps to discuss one of the foremost German-speaking watchmakers. From Schaffhausen to Glashütte, this is the Alango und Söhne Datagraph Perpetual. Still a flyback chronograph, but you can see that this features a later evolution of the Saxonia family dial, displacing the initial combination of stick indices and Roman numerals with an all-index dial, an all-stick index dial. As ever, the dial itself, though galvanized silver white, is made of sterling silver, and you can see the hands, alpha style at center, are actually loomed, so this watch is sportier than you might think. A solid gold moon phase disc inside a sterling silver dial, inside a 40.9 millimeter red gold case. There is a double-digit date. There is a perpetual calendar. This is a timepiece that features a brilliant system whereby if it falls behind a few days, you can actually use the pusher adjuster to step everything in sync so that the perpetual calendar day, date, month, and moon phase all move in step. So you can, for example, if you fall 3 or 4 days behind, simply press the trigger 3 or 4 times and everything catches up. Now you're good. As ever, the pusher feel on any Datagraph, best in the business. And with the Datagraph Perpetual, you're getting the caliber L9521. Turn it over and you see what I mean. It's gorgeous. Whereas a standard Datagraph is gorgeous, this one is gorgeous plus. Intellectually, the idea of the perpetual calendar, which need be adjusted only in the year 2100, is extraordinarily appealing. But aesthetically, it is just as emotional. As you can see, the combination of the lateral clutch, fully jeweled, and the black polished column wheel. As I tilt the watch through the light, note how many surfaces turn black. That's how many surfaces are black polished or mirror finished with a diamond paste. Big slow beating balance, 18,000 vibrations per hour. Horology, well, high horology. 5 positions of adjustment, overcoil hairspring, manual wind, and as you can see, everything gorgeous with the bridges golden in that nickel copper zinc known as German silver. That's what that's what German silver is. It is nickel copper and zinc with the copper shining through, giving it that red tone. Note both black polished screws and fired blued screws, as the blued screws are used for a physical assembly and the polished screws are used for adjustment of the mechanism. You'll also note immense anglage on the edge of the bridges, yes, but also the steel components of the chronograph. Everything here represents pretty close to the best in the business, which is why one of the few watches Philippe Dufour has purchased for himself was an Alango und Söhne Datagraph. This is the Datagraph Perpetual. If you like what you see here, reach out to me, Tim Mosso at thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing questions.